I got to admit, this is a really tough text, and I had kind of committed myself to preaching on John 6, and then I really got into it, and I was like, whoa, those other two are much easier, right? Proverbs are what Paul talks about. A little more straightforward, a little easier to understand, but I thought, you know what, let's get into it. I think there's some amazing things in there. And so I want to begin by asking you, have you ever heard of the three letters DTR? Anybody familiar with what a DTR is? Probably going back about 15 years, this was popular. It's not a video game. It's not what you get if you drink and drive. It's none of those things. I actually was first introduced to it in a book called Not a Fan by Kyle Idleman. I guess it was really popular in Kentucky, maybe. I'm not sure. But DTR means define the relationship, right? Those are the letters. D, define, T, the, and R, relationship. Now, you may not know what that is, but you know what it is. You've done this before in some way, shape, or form. You meet somebody for the first time, and right, is this going to be an acquaintance, or is this going to be a lifelong friend? Do you really click with them, or is there a disconnect? And if you've ever dated before, for those of you who are married, you've definitely done this. Right? The DTR for you was, I do, right? I now pronounce you husband and wife. That's the definition of your relationship. You are now married. And that's important in those relationships, because if you think you're married but your spouse thinks you're just acquaintances, I don't think I need to tell you how bad that's going to be. There's all kinds of expectations and things that are normal in certain relationships. And so we're always kind of doing that, even in those relationships that seem to be defined. Like I know my wife is my wife, and again, we stood before God and said we're gonna, this is who we're gonna be and what we're gonna be. But what if I never show her that? You know what I mean? I think I have to be continually defining that. To say, babe, I'm in this for keeps. Because, right, relationships hopefully grow, hopefully they're getting stronger, and all of that. And so even those defined relationships, we really want to continue to define what they are, because we want people to have that comfort. I want my wife to know she can count on me. A good example of this is my mother-in-law. I don't consider Bonnie, my wife's mom, as my mother-in-law. She's my mom. Now, that wasn't true when we first met, right? To call her mom instantly would have been odd. The first time I met her. That relationship developed, right? And 27, 28 years later, yeah, she's mom. And so that relationship has been defined. And there's clear expectations. I want her to know, no matter what, I'm going to be there for her. I'm going to see her and treat her as my mom, the same I would as my mom. DTR, man, define the relationship. I think that's what Jesus is doing in this passage. And I want to begin right at the beginning by saying that God just reminds us, and he is so clear and he is so upfront that this is his commitment to us. It's all over this entire chapter in John's Gospel, in John 6. There you have him feeding 5,000 people. He's saying, you are my people, and I'm going to take care of you. And so, right, with a couple of loaves and some fish, he feeds 5,000 people. Miraculous thing. And then he keeps going on and saying, there's more to life than just your food, right? Your earthly food, your physical food, like fish and like bread. But what he's saying is that he is the very thing that we need. And in this passage that we're going to look at, he just keeps reminding us of who he is, his commitment to us, what he was going to do and has done for us. The DTR, man, he did it first. And he went big. Like really big in here. So open up to John 6. We're going to start in verse 51. And again, he's been saying this same thing over and over again for a bunch of verses by the time we get to, right? Because if you're in your Bible, you'll see way back in verse 22, The heading is, I am the bread of life. And so we're all the way in 51. And what John gives us, and what Jesus gives us, is kind of a summary of all that he has said. I kind of like this, so we could pick it up right there. He says, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. It is my flesh. So what he's saying there is, this is where I came from. I came from heaven, came down here, became one of you. And again, he's going to go through a lot of things to save us. He's going to lay his life down to save us from sin, right? To rescue us, to be there for us. And so he is saying that he came down from heaven as this living bread. And right there, that should make you pause. Like, living bread? Like, how is that different than regular bread? Because what he's giving you a clue there. He's saying, like, I'm not talking about cannibalism. I'm not talking about you, right, cutting me into pieces and grabbing a piece and eating it. No. It's as Deb said in the kids' message, when you see in many cultures, and even today, you talk about someone not living by what? Bread alone. So bread stands for, like, the food you need. You can't live without it, right? You need something to eat and something to drink, or else you cease to exist. It's that clear. And that's what he's trying to say. Without me, you've got no life. You've got no shot. You're not going to get there. You're kind of dead in the water. But I'm the living bread who came here. So if you eat of this bread, and he's careful to say, which, by the way, is my flesh, then you will live forever. How cool is that? Everything we could possibly need is found in him. I think that's the point. It's not in some idea. It's not in some philosophy. It's in him. I often say, especially at like a memorial service, right, where we're dealing with death, and it's just so difficult, and we just don't get it. And we say, Lord, I just want some answers, right? I want some information. Could you explain this to me? Could you just sort of graph it out and help me to understand it? But I really think, and I'll say this very often, that if we got an answer from God, you know what we'd probably do? We'd revert right back to 2-year-olds. Because what do 2-year-olds say when you give them the information? They go, why? Why? Well, it's because of this. And we'd go, okay, well, why? Why? Right? It would be because we don't get it. And what Jesus is saying, that there is something bigger and better than the answer. It's him. And that's what he's saying. His very body, his flesh. And this idea of eating, we've heard this before in the Bible, haven't we? You go into the Psalms, right? It says, taste and see that the Lord is good. No one's going, man, like, I'm like biting God? Like, do I grab a chunk out of his arm? I mean, no. He's saying, like you experience it, you take it in. In fact, there was I learned this in college, and I don't know, maybe you've heard this before, that when you study something, when you really want to get it, you're supposed to do, I think it's 3 things. I'm going to make sure I got the right count. You're to read it, you mark it, and what's the third one? Read, mark. So you read it, you kind of, maybe, I don't know, highlight it, underline it, and then what's the third one? Anybody? Inwardly digest it. And if you haven't heard it, now you've got it, right? Pastor Fred gave me that extra little tidbit in the sermon, kind of nice. But it's that idea of, don't just look at it, don't just go, oh yeah, that's cool, I'm going to make a note of that. Let's face it, the things you actually act on and live out are the things that get inside of your heart and soul. The things that you sort of, again, you inwardly digest it. It becomes part of who you are. And the people that Jesus was talking to would have understood what he was saying. Because there were all these, they called them mystery religions that were kind of in the area. And for a lot of them, there would be this animal sacrifice, and they wouldn't like burn the entire thing, and some of that meat would get to the priests, right, the ones who kind of worked in those pagan temples, but some of that the worshipers would get. And the thought was that deity, right, that whatever that false god, that they sort of inhabited that meat. And so if you're eating that, you're like literally ingesting that god, and you're getting his power. And so when Jesus says this, there would have been people who would have understood it that way. It wouldn't have felt like cannibalism or seemed really gross to them, but they would be like, okay, I get it. This isn't a casual like thing when it comes to believing in Jesus. He is saying, look, there's a line in the sand. There's a DTR. I want you to define the relationship because Jesus has already defined it. He's living bread. He already came down from heaven, and he's saying, look, you need to take all of this in, all of it, all of him. Now again, some people didn't like that. The Jewish people, the word there for disputed literally means like they almost came to blows. Like there was almost a brawl. Not quite a brawl, but really, I mean, they weren't just like, well, I don't think you're right, Bob. You know, it was like a heated, think of your worst venomous Facebook thread. You know what I mean? Where people are just going after each other. That's what it was. Trying to figure it out. And we do the same. How can you give us flesh to eat? And Jesus says, and he doubles down, and he not only talks about flesh, but notice in the next section he says, eat my flesh and do what? Drink my blood, which for a Jewish person, if he's talking literal blood drinking, they had a problem with that, right? They had laws where you couldn't, in fact, when you prepared your meat, you drained all the blood out. Life is in the blood. You don't consume blood. To this day, if you talk to a Jewish person, that's what they'll tell you. But I don't think that was necessarily the problem. I think they're hiding behind that. So Jesus says, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you got no life in you. Where is life found? In Jesus. In his dying for you, in his rising for you. That's where the life is. And so if I feed on that, take that into my heart, into my soul, and that's kind of, he's sort of filling in some blanks when it comes to maybe what communion might be about. The totality of this. He says, that person has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. We don't trust in a philosophy. We don't trust in some idea. We trust in Jesus, this love of God that is in there. And he says it's his flesh that he's going to give, right? And he says that's true food. His blood is true drink. So if you feed on that, again, in case you missed it the first dozen times, you abide in me and I in you. Remember back, well, it hasn't happened yet, but Jesus in a few chapters from now will talk about being the vine and the branches. And he'll bring this back up, another image. I'm the vine, you're the branches. Unless you're connected and hooked in and part of this, if you want to sit on the sidelines and sort of dabble, right? You don't dabble in Jesus. That's the point. It's your life. Not just a part of your life. And that's why we get into problems. And I think with a lot of this stuff, especially when you think about this DTR and define the relationship, God has said, he's all in. He wants all of you, man. He's adopted you. He's made you his child. We're the ones, I think, who have the problem. That's why a lot of them left. They're like, ooh, this is too difficult. Because this is a full-time commitment. This is a cutting ties with the old way of thinking. And it's pretty clear that they have an old way of thinking. They wanted that old religion that they had. It's all about Moses. I don't think they talked like that, but it was that idea that Moses, he gave us the manna. He was the one that saved us. He delivered us. And it's like, well, guys, Jesus calls them on this. When you go into like the book of Exodus, and Deuteronomy, What does it say? Does it say, remember Moses and how he got you up out of the land of Egypt, out of that land of slavery? Does he say that? No. It says, remember the Lord your God who brought you up out of the land of slavery, out of Egypt. He brought you out of that. He saved you, not Moses. Moses didn't produce manna. Moses didn't produce quail when you all complained about having that manna every day, right? It was God himself. In a very real sense, it was Jesus. Sort of, I don't know, could you call it like prefiguring that? Like sort of getting us ready for that, helping us to think about God taking care of us. When he fed the 5,000, it wasn't about the bread. In fact, they wanted to cling to that. Oh, this Jesus. We're going to get a lunch out of this. Maybe we get lunch every day. How cool. And Jesus calls them to task. He says, look, guys, I know it was great. It showed my power. But it wasn't about the physical bread that you guys were able to be filled and your stomachs and it stopped growling and you were satisfied. Right? It wasn't about that. It's this deeper need that you have, this deeper hunger, right? Because you're lost without me. You have nothing. You're dead without me. You need this to bring you back to life and keep you alive even for eternity. So in verse 58, he goes, if you eat this bread, you'll live forever. If you want to focus on all those other things, it's not going to sustain you. In fact, as he said, it happened in the wilderness, they ate the manna and they died. Jesus came that we might have life. And so they get offended and they want to leave. And Jesus says in verse 63, because it's the Spirit who gives life. The flesh, no help at all. The words that I spoke to you, they're spirit and life. And again, they're meant for us to say, look, we need Jesus. Jesus has given himself for us, and he's going, look, just let's define the relationship. How about you say that you need me? How about you say that you have sinned? How about you saying, like, you can't control this relationship, but that your Lord he's got these open arms, and he's saying, I want you to not miss out and to have this amazing, 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 amazing truth in your hearts. That this sacrifice that he made, that we would believe that it's for us. That's the relationship that we want to define. That I am his and I am following him. And I want all the people in my life to follow him and to have the life that he has given to us and gave himself for us. Peter, right? Simon Peter, he for once gets it right. A couple other times he does too. But Jesus is like, hey, y'all gonna leave? Is that what's gonna happen? Are you guys can't handle this either? And Peter says, Lord, to whom shall we go? That's so important. What else? What he's saying is, what else can really satisfy? And I know I say this a lot, but the world promises us so much. All these products, so much. But let's be honest, most of the things that we latch onto for safety and security and that are gonna be there for us, I mean, a lot of them aren't around anymore. All of them will show their true colors. At the very end of things, all of them will be seen for what they are, and it's nothing. Empty. God's promises are never empty. It's always perfect. It's always yes. It's always like concrete and real. And that's what Jesus is trying to say by using body and blood and his flesh and all of those images so that we know it's him. Actually him. Died on the cross, rose, is actually alive and is actually with us. And we follow him every day. We got this promise that he loves us. And where else are we going to go? Because we have believed and we have come to know that Jesus is the Holy One of God. See, that's the difficulty, because our world says, all roads lead to heaven, as long as you're sincere. But Jesus says, look at what I have for you. I give my very life for you. And he doesn't want us to miss that. I don't want any of us to miss that. So it's good for us to do this every once in a while, to get that DTR going. Say, okay, God's committed to me, but what's my commitment to him? Am I trying to hedge my bets? Am I trying to hold off? Am I trying to keep him at a distance? Because I don't want this thing to be too serious. I'll end on this. I remember when I first came to faith. Oh my goodness. Because I went from this like crazy heavy metal kid, right? So my parents, my friends, my brother and my sisters, that's who they knew, right? And now we got dude who wants to read the Bible, who loves Jesus. And boy, I think it rocked their world. They were like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? And I'll never forget this. My grandma, my Nana, a little Polish, right, Roman Catholic to the core, and just love her. She's with Jesus. It's awesome. But she just thought I was a maniac. And I'll never forget, she would ask me, like I was a pastor for like 10 years, and she'd ask me, you still want to do this? Like, you still want to be, right? And I'll never forget, she asked me, like, was I going to set myself on fire and jump off of a roof? And I was like, no, that's not what this is about. It's about Jesus. And she was like, oh, okay, good. That's what it's about, right? The world might think we're crazy. They might think we've gone off the deep end. They might read passages like this and go, whoa, what's going on there? But we can just say, like, we need Jesus and we want more of him. Every day, more of him. I want to grow in my faith, to be strengthened in him every single day. Man, that's the DTR that we're looking for. All right, so in his name we pray. Amen.